The steakhouse buzzed with the usual Friday night energy as Commander Sarah, Phoenix, Martinez adjusted her civilian clothes one last time before stepping through the heavy wooden doors. After 18 months of intensive training and briefings, she was finally ready to meet her new team. The SEAL Team 7 had been her assignment for 3 weeks now, but tonight would be the first time she'd interact with them in an informal setting. Sarah had specifically chosen this restaurant because it was known to be a favorite among the local military personnel. She wanted to observe her team in their natural environment before officially taking command on Monday morning. At 34, she had worked harder than most people could imagine to reach this position. The path hadn't been easy. Being one of the first women to complete SEAL training had meant enduring scrutiny that would have broken lesser individuals. Her intelligence background had served her well during the grueling selection process. Years of psychological operations and strategic planning had taught her to read people, to anticipate their moves, and to remain calm under pressure that would shatter most minds. But tonight, she was just another person in civilian clothes, hopping to grab a quiet dinner and maybe catch a glimpse of the men she would soon be leading into some of the most dangerous missions imaginable. The hostess led her to a corner booth with a clear view of the main dining area. Sarah ordered a simple meal and settled in to wait. She didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, she spotted them, a group of 6 men at a large, round table near the bar area. She recognized them from their personnel files. Lieutenant Commander Jake Hammer, the team's current acting leader, Petty Officer First Class Tank, Chief Petty Officer David Doc Williams, and the others whose files she had memorized down to the smallest detail. They were exactly as she had expected, loud, confident, and completely unaware that their new commanding officer was sitting less than 30 feet away. Sarah found herself smiling as she watched their interactions. These were good men, elite warriors who had proven themselves in combat zones across the globe. Their camaraderie was evident in every gesture, every shared joke, every moment of synchronized laughter. But there was one person at their table who immediately caught her attention for all the wrong reasons. Gunnery Sergeant Mike Bulldog Harrison sat at the head of the table like he owned the place. Sarah had read his file with particular interest. Harrison was a Marine who had somehow managed to get himself attached to their SEAL team for a joint operation that had been extended indefinitely. His record was impressive from a tactical standpoint, but there were concerning notes about his attitude toward authority and his treatment of female personnel. As Sarah watched, Harrison dominated the conversation with increasingly loud stories about his various exploits. His voice carried across the restaurant as he regaled the others with tales that seemed to grow more outrageous with each telling. The SEALs listened politely, but Sarah could see the subtle signs of discomfort in their body language. They respected the Marine's combat experience, but there was something about his demeanor that didn't quite fit with their team dynamic. And then I told that female officer exactly what I thought about her tactical suggestions, Harrison was saying, his voice booming across the restaurant. Some people just aren't cut out for real combat, you know? They can play soldier all they want, but when it comes down to the wire, you need someone with actual experience making the calls. Sarah felt her jaw tighten slightly, but she maintained her composure. This wasn't the first time she had heard such opinions, and she had learned long ago that actions spoke louder than arguments. Still, she made a mental note about Harrison's attitude. It would definitely need to be addressed once she took command. The evening progressed with Sarah observing from her corner booth. She learned more about her team in 2 hours of casual observation than she could have gleaned from months of formal reports. Was clearly respected by his men, but there was a hesitancy in his leadership that suggested he was uncomfortable with temporary command. Had a quick wit and seemed to serve as the team's morale officer. Williams was quiet but observant, the kind of man who saw everything but spoke only when his words would have maximum impact. As the night went on, the restaurant began to fill up with more military personnel. Sarah noticed several groups of young Marines and sailors, most of them clearly new to the area and still adjusting to military life. Their nervous energy and overly enthusiastic conversations marked them as recent graduates from various training programs. It was around 9 o'clock when things began to take an interesting turn. Sarah had just finished her meal and was considering whether to leave or order dessert when she noticed a commotion at the bar. A young woman in navy dress uniform was trying to get the bartender's attention while being repeatedly interrupted by a group of rowdy Marines who seemed to think her presence was an invitation for unwanted conversation. Sarah watched as the situation developed, her training automatically assessing the dynamics at play. The woman was clearly uncomfortable but maintaining her military bearing. The Marines were drunk enough to be persistent, but not quite drunk enough to be completely inappropriate. Yet, it was the kind of situation that could escalate quickly if the right spark was introduced. And that spark came in the form of Gunnery Sergeant Harrison. Sarah saw him notice the situation at the bar, saw his eyes light up with the kind of predatory interest that made her skin crawl. He excused himself from the sealed table and made his way over to the bar with the confident swagger of a man who had never been told no in his life. "Looks like you could use some help over here," Harrison announced loudly as he approached the young woman. His voice carried clearly across the restaurant, causing several other diners to look up from their conversations. The woman turned to face him with a polite but firm expression. "Thank you, Sergeant, but I'm fine, just waiting for my order." "Harrison," he corrected her with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Gunnery Sergeant Harrison, and you don't look fine to me. You look like someone who's in over her head." Sarah felt her hands clench involuntarily as she watched the interaction unfold. The young woman was clearly trying to remain professional, but Harrison was making that increasingly difficult with his aggressive posture and condescending tone. "I appreciate your concern," the woman replied carefully, "but I can handle myself." "Can you now?" Harrison's voice took on a mocking tone. "That's what they all say until the real trouble starts. Tell you what, sweetheart, why don't you come sit with me and my boys over there? We'll make sure nobody bothers you." Sarah watched as the woman's composure began to crack slightly. This was clearly not her first encounter with this type of behavior, but that didn't make it any easier to deal with. The other Marines at the bar had backed off when Harrison appeared, recognizing his rank and aggressive demeanor. But that left the woman isolated and increasingly uncomfortable. "Thank you for the offer," the woman said firmly, "but I prefer to sit alone." Harrison's expression darkened at the rejection. "Look, I'm trying to be nice here. You're new around here, right? Let me give you some free advice. This isn't the kind of place where little girls should be wandering around by themselves. There are dangerous people in here." The irony of his statement was lost on him, but it wasn't lost on Sarah. She could see the situation deteriorating rapidly, and her protective instincts were warring with her desire to remain unobserved. As a commander, she had a responsibility to intervene in situations like this. But as someone who was supposed to be undercover, getting involved could compromise her position. The decision was made for her when Harrison reached out and grabbed the woman's arm. "Come on," he said with false joviality. "Don't be difficult. I'm trying to help you out here." The woman tried to pull away, but Harrison's grip tightened. "Let go of me," she said clearly, her voice carrying enough authority to make several nearby conversations stop. "Hey now," Harrison said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "There's no need to get hostile. I'm just trying to be friendly." But his definition of friendly apparently included maintaining his grip on her arm and using his size to intimidate her into compliance. Sarah could see the panic starting to build behind the woman's professional mask, and she knew she had to act. Sarah stood up from her booth and began making her way toward the bar. Her movement was casual but purposeful, the kind of approach that suggested she belonged wherever she was going. She had learned this technique during her intelligence training, how to insert herself into a situation without appearing to do so deliberately. As she got closer, she could hear more of the conversation. "Look, Sergeant," the woman was saying, "I need you to let go of me right now." "It's Gunnery Sergeant," Harrison corrected her again, his grip still firm on her arm. "And I think you need to learn some respect for rank around here. Maybe a little one-on-one instruction would do you some good." The suggestion in his voice made Sarah's blood run cold. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was moving into dangerous territory very quickly. She quickened her pace slightly, her mind already calculating the best way to diffuse the situation without causing a scene that would draw unwanted attention to herself. But before she could reach them, the situation took another turn. The young woman, clearly at the end of her patience and probably her tolerance for harassment, did something that surprised everyone in the immediate area. She smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile or a nervous smile. It was the kind of smile that predators recognize instinctively, the smile of someone who has just realized that their perceived prey might actually be more dangerous than they initially appeared. "Gunnery Sergeant Harrison," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the now-quiet section of the restaurant. "I'm going to ask you one more time to remove your hand from my person." Harrison seemed taken aback by the sudden change in her demeanor, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. "Or what?" he challenged, tightening his grip slightly. "Or I'm going to remove it for you," she replied calmly. The threat should have seemed ridiculous. Harrison outweighed her by at least 80 pounds and had 6 inches of height advantage. But something in her voice made the nearby observers take a step back rather than forward. Harrison, however, either didn't pick up on the warning signs or chose to ignore them. "You know what your problem is," he said, leaning closer to her face. "You don't know your place. Someone should teach you some respect." And then he made the mistake that would define the rest of the evening. He reached out with his free hand and grabbed a fistful of her hair, using it to force her to look directly at him. "Now," he said with a cruel smile, "let's discuss how things work around here." The restaurant seemed to freeze for a moment, as if everyone present understood that something significant was about to happen, but wasn't quite sure what. Sarah found herself holding her breath, her own hand instinctively moving toward a defensive position, even though she was still several feet away. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but it seemed to unfold in slow motion. The woman's left hand came up in a smooth, practiced motion that caught Harrison's wrist in a grip that looked almost gentle. At the same time, her right hand moved to a specific point on his forearm that Sarah recognized from her own combat training. The combination of leverage and pressure point manipulation caused Harrison's hand to open involuntarily, releasing her hair immediately. Before he could react, she stepped into his personal space with a fluid motion that put her inside his reach while simultaneously off-balancing him. Her elbow found a soft spot just below his with surgical precision, driving the air from his lungs in a whoosh that could be heard across the silent restaurant. As Harrison doubled over, gasping for breath, the woman stepped back to a safe distance and smoothed down her hair with the calm efficiency of someone who had just completed a routine task. "I asked you to let go," she said matter-of-factly to the wheezing Marine. The entire restaurant stared in stunned silence. Harrison was still bent over, trying to catch his breath and process what had just happened. The other Marines at the bar had backed away completely, unsure whether they should help their fellow Marine or applaud the woman's technique. But it was the reaction from the sealed table that caught Sarah's attention. Instead of the shock or disapproval she might have expected, she saw something entirely different in their faces: recognition. Was the first to start laughing. Not mockery or cruelty, but genuine amusement mixed with something that looked like respect. Was grinning widely, and Williams was nodding approvingly. The other SEALs were looking at each other with expressions that suggested they knew something the rest of the restaurant didn't. "Well, I'll be damned," said loudly enough to be heard across the restaurant. "Looks like someone finally taught Bulldog some manners." Harrison straightened up slowly, his face red with a combination of embarrassment and rage. His eyes locked onto the woman with a hatred that made Sarah's protective instincts flare. "You little," he started to say, taking a threatening step toward her. "Is there a problem here?" The voice came from behind Harrison, and he spun around to find himself face to face with, and who had appeared with the silent efficiency that marked them as elite operators. Their casual stance and friendly expressions didn't hide the steel underneath. "This is between me and her," Harrison growled, pointing at the woman. "Actually," said with an easy smile, "I think it's between you and us now." Nodded in agreement. "See, Mike, we've been watching this whole thing, and from where we're sitting, it looks like you just assaulted a fellow service member." "She's the one who attacked me," Harrison protested. "After you grabbed her hair," Williams added as he joined the group, "in front of about 50 witnesses." Harrison looked around the restaurant and seemed to realize for the first time that every eye in the place was on him. The other Marines who had been harassing the woman earlier had melted away into the crowd, unwilling to be associated with what was clearly going to become an incident. "This isn't over," Harrison said to the woman, but his voice lacked the confidence it had carried earlier. "Yes," she replied calmly, "it is." Stepped forward slightly, not enough to be openly threatening, but enough to remind Harrison that he was outnumbered and outranked. "Mike, I think maybe you should call it a night. Head back to base, sleep it off, and we'll all pretend this didn't happen." It was clearly an offer, not a suggestion. Harrison looked around the group of SEALs, then at the woman, then at the crowd of witnesses, and seemed to realize that he had no good options. "This isn't finished," he muttered, but he was already backing toward the door. "Yeah, it is," repeated, his friendly tone carrying an unmistakable finality. Harrison left without another word, pushing through the restaurant doors with enough force to make them bang against the walls. The tension in the restaurant slowly began to dissipate as conversations gradually resumed. The woman at the bar straightened her uniform and turned to face the SEALs who had come to her aid. "Thank you," she said simply. "That wasn't necessary, but I appreciate it." "Actually," said with a grin, "we were just enjoying the show. That was some nice work." "Where did you learn to do that?" Williams asked with professional interest. The woman smiled slightly, here and there. Studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You know, you look familiar. Have we met before?" "I don't think so," she replied, "but I'm sure we will." There was something in her tone that made all three SEALs look at her more closely. But before they could ask any follow-up questions, she had gathered her things and was heading for the door. "Wait," called after her, "what's your name?" She paused at the door and looked back with a smile that held secrets. "You'll find out soon enough." And then she was gone, leaving the SEALs staring after her with expressions of curiosity and growing suspicion. Sarah waited another few minutes before making her own exit, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just witnessed. The evening had certainly been more eventful than she had planned, but it had also been extremely informative. She had learned that her team was willing to stand up for what was right, even when it meant confronting a fellow service member. She had learned that Harrison was going to be even more of a problem than his file had suggested. And she had learned that her own reputation might have preceded her more than she had realized. As she walked to her car, Sarah found herself looking forward to Monday morning with a mixture of anticipation and amusement. Her first official meeting with SEAL Team 7 was going to be very interesting indeed. The weekend passed quietly as Sarah put the finishing touches on her preparation for taking command. She reviewed personnel files one more time, studied mission reports, and familiarized herself with the current operational status of her new team. The incident at the restaurant had given her valuable insights into the team dynamics, but it had also highlighted some challenges she would need to address immediately. Harrison's behavior was completely unacceptable, and his attitude toward female personnel made him a liability that could compromise missions and endanger lives. She would need to deal with that situation quickly and decisively. But she would also need to do it in a way that didn't undermine the relationships he had built with some of the other team members. The SEALs' reaction to the incident had been encouraging. They had shown both moral courage and tactical awareness, stepping in to defuse a situation that could have escalated into something much worse. But their reaction to her mystery woman act suggested they might be more perceptive than she had hoped. She would need to be prepared for some interesting questions when she revealed her identity. Sunday evening found her in her new office on base, making final preparations for the morning. Her personnel were expecting to meet their new commanding officer at 800 hours sharp, and she intended to make a memorable first impression. As she arranged her desk and hung her credentials on the wall, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The next few weeks were going to be challenging, but they were also going to be exactly what she had spent her entire career working toward. She had earned this command through years of sacrifice, determination, and excellence under pressure. Now it was time to prove that she deserved it. Monday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency that marked all military installations. Naval Special Warfare Command was buzzing with its usual pre-dawn activity as personnel prepared for another day of training, planning, and operations. In the SEAL Team 7 ready room, 6 elite operators gathered around their familiar conference table, coffee cups in hand and expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. Lieutenant Commander Jake Hammer checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. Their new commanding officer was supposed to arrive at 800 hours, and it was currently 7:55. He had mixed feelings about this whole situation. He had been acting commander for 3 months, and while he hadn't particularly enjoyed the administrative responsibilities, he had grown comfortable with the team dynamics. "So what do we know about this new commander?" asked Petty Officer First Class Tank, settling into his chair with his characteristic easy confidence. "Not much," admitted. "Command has been pretty tight-lipped about the whole thing. I know it's someone with an intelligence background and extensive special operations experience, but beyond that, he shrugged. Chief Petty Officer David Doc Williams looked up from the file he had been studying. I did some digging through the personnel database. Couldn't find much, but what I found was interesting. Whoever this is has a classification level that's way above what you'd expect for a team commander. What kind of classification? Asked Petty Officer Second Class Tony Ghost Martinez, leaning forward with interest. The kind that makes entire sections of their file disappear when you try to access them, Williams replied dryly. Petty Officer First Class Chris Reaper Johnson snorted. Great. Another spook who thinks they can run special operations because they've read about it in a classified manual. Easy there, Reaper, cautioned. We don't know anything about this person yet. Let's at least meet them before we start making judgments. I'm just saying, Johnson continued. We've been through this before. Remember Colonel, Guy had never been in real combat but thought he could redesign our entire operational structure based on some theoretical models he'd studied. The mention of made several of the men grimace. That particular assignment had lasted exactly 6 weeks before the colonel had been quietly transferred to a desk job that better suited his academic approach to warfare. This is different, said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. This person specifically requested assignment to our team. That suggests they know what they're getting into. Or they think they do, muttered. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Gunnery Sergeant Mike Bulldog Harrison, who entered the ready room with his usual swagger slightly diminished by the events of Friday night. He had spent the weekend nursing both his bruised ego and his sore ribs, and his mood was decidedly foul. Morning, he growled, helping himself to coffee without acknowledging the subtle change in atmosphere his presence had created. The SEALs exchanged glances. They had discussed Friday's incident extensively over the weekend, and while they all agreed that Harrison had been completely out of line, they also recognized that he was technically part of their operational unit for the foreseeable future. How are you feeling, Mike? Asked carefully. Fine, Harrison replied curtly. Just peachy. Look, said, deciding to address the elephant in the room, about Friday night. What about it? Harrison interrupted. Some little girl sucker punched me while I wasn't looking. It won't happen again. Williams raised an eyebrow. That's not exactly how I remember it. Well, your memory must be foggy, Harrison shot back, because what I remember is being by some wannabe tough girl who got lucky. Couldn't help himself. Mike, there were about 50 people watching. She gave you multiple warnings, you grabbed her hair, and she defended herself. There was nothing lucky about it. Harrison's face reddened. Whose side are you on here? The side of not getting our asses handed to us by the new commander when he finds out one of his people has been harassing female personnel, said firmly. Since when do you care about? Harrison started to say, but he was cut off by the sound of the ready room door opening. All conversation stopped as the team members turned to see who was entering. They expected to see their new commanding officer, possibly accompanied by an aide or an escort from command. What they didn't expect was to see a single figure in perfectly pressed dress blues walk into the room with the kind of confident bearing that marked a seasoned combat veteran. What they really didn't expect was for that figure to be female. Commander Sarah Phoenix Martinez stepped into the room and paused just inside the doorway, her eyes moving across the faces of her new team with the analytical precision of someone who had spent years reading people for a living. She saw surprise, curiosity, skepticism, and in one case, dawning recognition that made her smile slightly. Good morning, she said in a clear voice that carried the unmistakable authority of command. I'm Commander Martinez, your new team leader. The silence that followed was deafening. 6 elite warriors, trained to react instantly to any situation, sat frozen in their chairs as their minds processed what they were seeing. This was their new commander. The person they had been expecting turned out to be the woman from Friday night. Was the first to recover, years of military training overriding his shock. He stood quickly, followed by the others, and snapped to attention. Ma'am, welcome to SEAL Team 7. Thank you, Lieutenant Commander, Sarah replied, moving to the head of the conference table. Please be seated. As the men settled back into their chairs, Sarah took a moment to study each of their faces. She could see the questions forming, the confusion and uncertainty that came with having their expectations completely overturned. This was exactly the kind of situation she had trained for, and she intended to handle it with the professionalism and confidence that had gotten her this far. "I'm sure you have questions," she began, placing her briefcase on the table and opening it with practiced efficiency. "But before we address those, let me give you some background information that might help clarify things." She pulled out a stack of files and distributed them around the table. "These are my service records. You'll find that I graduated from the Naval Academy 15 years ago, completed SEAL training 18 months ago, and have spent the last decade working in naval intelligence and special operations." Opened his file and immediately let out a low whistle. "Ma'am, these mission records are classified," Sarah finished for him. "But I can tell you that I've led operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and several other locations that I can't name in an open forum. I've been shot at, blown up, and had more coffee with warlords and terrorist leaders than I care to remember." Williams was scanning through his copy with increasing amazement. "This says you were involved in Operation Neptune's Sword." Sarah nodded. "Planning and execution. I spent 3 months in deep cover gathering intelligence before the strike team went in." "That operation took out 3 high-value targets in a single night," Johnson said with growing respect. "The intelligence had to be absolutely perfect." "It was," Sarah replied simply. Looked up from his file with an expression of dawning understanding. "You're Phoenix." Sarah smiled slightly. "I see my reputation has preceded me." Phoenix was a legend in the special operations community, the operative behind some of the most successful intelligence coups of the past decade. Someone whose gender had been deliberately kept classified to protect their operational effectiveness. Had heard stories about Phoenix for years, but had never imagined he would meet the person behind the, much less serve under their command. "Holy shit," Breath then immediately looked embarrassed. "Sorry, ma'am, wow." "It's quite all right, petty officer," Sarah said with amusement. "I've heard worse." The atmosphere in the room had shifted dramatically. Where moments before there had been skepticism and uncertainty, now there was something approaching awe. These men knew enough about special operations to understand exactly what they were looking at when they read her file. This wasn't some desk jockey or theoretical tactician. This was someone who had been in the field, had made life-and-death decisions under pressure, and had succeeded in environments where failure meant death. All except for one person. Harrison had been sitting in stunned silence since Sarah entered the room, his coffee growing cold in his hands as his mind struggled to process what was happening. The woman who had humiliated him on Friday night was now his commanding officer. The little girl he had tried to intimidate was one of the most successful intelligence operatives in the Navy's history. "You," he said suddenly, his voice hoarse with shock. Sarah turned to face him with the same calm expression she had worn in the restaurant. "Yes, Gunnery Sergeant Harrison, me." The room fell silent again as everyone present remembered Friday night's incident. The implications were staggering. Harrison hadn't just harassed some random female officer. He had physically assaulted his new commanding officer without knowing it. "I think," Sarah said quietly, "that you and I need to have a private conversation after this meeting." Harrison's face had gone pale. He nodded wordlessly, apparently unable to trust his voice. Sarah turned back to the rest of the team. "Now then, let's discuss your current operational status and upcoming missions. Lieutenant Commander, I understand you have a briefing prepared." For the next hour, Sarah listened as walked her through the team's current assignments, training schedules, and personnel issues. She asked pointed questions that demonstrated her understanding of special operations tactics and logistics. She made suggestions that showed innovative thinking combined with practical experience. And most importantly, she listened. By the end of the briefing, it was clear to everyone in the room that their new commander knew exactly what she was doing. Her questions weren't the theoretical inquiries of someone trying to sound knowledgeable. They were the specific, technical questions of someone who had been there and done that. "Excellent brief, Lieutenant Commander," Sarah said as concluded his presentation. "I can see this team has maintained its readiness standards admirably during the transition period." "Thank you, ma'am," replied. "The men have been working hard to stay sharp." "It shows," Sarah said, looking around the room. "I've reviewed all of your files, and I'm impressed by what I see. This is exactly the kind of unit I was hoping to command." She stood up and moved to the front of the room, her bearing shifting slightly into a more formal command presence. Let me be clear about my expectations. I don't care about your personal opinions regarding female commanders. I don't care if you think women belong in special operations. What I care about is mission success, unit cohesion, and operational excellence. She paused to make eye contact with each man in turn. I earned my place here the same way all of you did, through training, dedication, and proven performance under pressure. I expect to be judged by the same standards you would apply to any commander, and I expect those standards to be high. Raised his hand slightly. Ma'am, can I ask, why did you request assignment to our team specifically? Sarah smiled. Good question. SEAL Team 7 has one of the highest mission success rates in the command. You've operated in some of the most challenging environments imaginable, and you've consistently delivered results. I wanted to work with the best, and according to every metric I could find, that's exactly what you are. The compliment had its intended effect. These men took pride in their reputation, and having it acknowledged by someone of Sarah's caliber meant something significant. However, Sarah continued, her tone becoming more serious, excellence in past performance doesn't guarantee future success. We're going to be facing new challenges, new missions, and new operational requirements. That means we need to be prepared to adapt and evolve. Williams leaned forward. What kind of changes are we talking about, ma'am? The kind that come with having a commander who has spent the last decade developing new approaches to intelligence gathering and target elimination, Sarah replied. I've been brought in because Command wants to see if some of those approaches can be integrated with traditional SEAL tactics. Johnson looked intrigued despite himself. Can you give us an example? Sarah considered for a moment. How long does it typically take your team to gather actionable intelligence on a high-value target in an urban environment? Depends on the target, answered. Anywhere from a few days to several weeks. Using what methods? Surveillance, signal intercept, human intelligence from local assets. Sarah nodded. All solid approaches. But what if I told you I once gathered complete intelligence on a terrorist cell's operations, including their safe house locations, operational schedules, and planned targets, in less than 48 hours? The room was silent as the implications sank in. How, Martinez asked. By going to a dinner party, Sarah replied with a slight smile. Blinked a dinner party. The target's wife was hosting a charity fundraiser for local war orphans. I posed as a wealthy American philanthropist interested in contributing to the cause. By the end of the evening, I had been invited to their home, introduced to their key associates, and given detailed information about their operational security procedures. Shook his head in amazement. They just told you. People are remarkably forthcoming when they think you're sympathetic to their cause, Sarah explained. The key is understanding human psychology and knowing how to present yourself in a way that encourages confidence. That's incredible, Williams said, but how does that translate to SEAL operations? Think about it, Sarah said. How many of your missions involve direct action against targets who are embedded in civilian populations? How often do you need intelligence that can only be obtained through human interaction rather than technical surveillance? The questions were rhetorical, but they made their point. These men had all been on missions where better intelligence could have meant the difference between success and failure, between casualties and clean operations. I'm not suggesting we abandon traditional tactics, Sarah continued. What I'm proposing is that we expand our toolkit, that we become more flexible, more adaptable, more capable of operating in complex environments where conventional approaches might not be sufficient. She moved back to her briefcase and pulled out another set of files. Which brings me to our first assignment under my command. We've been tasked with a mission that's going to require exactly the kind of innovative thinking I'm talking about. The files she distributed contained target photographs, location maps, and preliminary intelligence reports. As the team members reviewed the materials, their expressions grew increasingly serious. This is Al, Sarah said, pointing to the main target photograph. He's a mid-level operative in a terrorist organization that's been targeting American interests in the Middle East. Intelligence suggests he's planning something significant, but we don't know what, where, or when. Studied the file. Traditional intelligence gathering has been unsuccessful. Completely, Sarah confirmed. He's extremely security conscious, trusts virtually no one, and operates through a network of intermediaries that makes electronic surveillance nearly impossible. So how do we get to him? Johnson asked. Sarah smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression. We're going to use his one weakness against him. Al has a reputation as something of a ladies' man. He frequents high-end social clubs in several major cities, always accompanied by beautiful women who seem to enjoy his company tremendously. Was beginning to see where this was going. You're thinking of an infiltration operation. Exactly, but not the kind you're used to. This won't be about breaking into a compound or conducting a direct action raid. This will be about social manipulation, psychological pressure, and very careful intelligence gathering in an environment where a single mistake could compromise not just the mission, but the lives of everyone involved. The room was quiet as the team absorbed the implications of what their new commander was proposing. This wasn't just a different kind of mission. It was a completely different way of thinking about special operations. Ma'am, Martinez said carefully, this sounds incredibly dangerous. It is, Sarah agreed. But it's also the kind of operation that can succeed where traditional approaches have failed. The question is whether this team is ready to try something new. She looked around the room, studying each face carefully. These were elite operators, accustomed to high-risk missions and complex planning, but this would challenge them in ways they had never experienced before. I want to be clear about something, Sarah said. I'm not asking anyone to do anything I wouldn't do myself. In fact, I'll be taking point on the most dangerous aspects of this mission. But I need to know that I have a team behind me that's willing to trust my judgment and follow my lead, even when the tactics seem unconventional. Was the first to respond. Ma'am, if you think this is the best approach, then we're with you. One by one, the others nodded their agreement. These men had spent their careers following orders and trusting their commanders, but this felt different. This felt like they were being invited to participate in something revolutionary. All except Harrison, who had remained conspicuously silent throughout the entire briefing. Gunnery Sergeant Harrison, Sarah said, turning to face him directly. Do you have any questions about the mission? Harrison looked up, his expression unreadable. No, ma'am. Good, then I think it's time for that private conversation we discussed earlier. The dismissal was clear, and the rest of the team began gathering their materials and preparing to leave. But before they could go, Sarah addressed them one more time. I know this is a lot to process. You came in here expecting one thing and got something completely different. If anyone has concerns or questions, my door is always open. But I want you to know that I consider myself extremely fortunate to be working with this team, and I intend to do everything in my power to maintain the standards of excellence you've established. As the team filed out of the ready room, leaving Sarah alone with Harrison, the atmosphere shifted once again. The professional courtesy and mutual respect that had characterized the meeting evaporated, replaced by the tension that had been building since Friday night. Harrison remained seated, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, his eyes focused on the table rather than on his commanding officer. Sarah took the seat directly across from him, her expression calm but watchful. So, she said quietly, here we are. The silence in the ready room stretched for nearly a full minute as Sarah studied Harrison's rigid posture and carefully controlled breathing. She had dealt with hostile subordinates before, but this situation was particularly delicate. Harrison's behavior on Friday night had been completely unacceptable, but she also needed to salvage whatever operational value he might have for the team while ensuring he understood the consequences of his actions. Look at me, Gunnery Sergeant, Sarah said finally, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of command. Harrison raised his eyes reluctantly, and Sarah could see the mix of anger, embarrassment, and resentment burning behind them. This was a man whose worldview had been fundamentally challenged, and he was struggling to process the implications. I want to be very clear about what happened Friday night, Sarah began, her tone calm but firm. You physically assaulted a fellow service member. You ignored multiple verbal warnings. You used your size and rank to intimidate someone you perceived as vulnerable, and you did all of this in front of dozens of witnesses. Harrison's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Under normal circumstances, Sarah continued, that kind of behavior would result in formal charges, disciplinary action, and probably the end of your career. Do you understand that? Yes, ma'am, Harrison replied through gritted teeth. However, Sarah said, leaning back in her chair, these are not normal circumstances. You're currently attached to this team for operational reasons that are above both our pay grades. That means I have a choice to make. I can follow proper protocol and destroy your career, or I can give you an opportunity to salvage the situation. For the first time, something other than anger flickered across Harrison's face. What kind of opportunity? The kind that requires you to take a long, hard look at your attitudes and behavior and make some fundamental changes, Sarah replied. I've read your file, Gunnery Sergeant. You're an excellent Marine. Your tactical skills are outstanding, your combat record is impressive, and your men respect your leadership abilities. But you have a serious problem with authority figures who don't fit your preconceived notions of what leadership should look like. Harrison started to speak, but Sarah held up a hand to stop him. I'm not finished, she said. This isn't the first incident in your record. There was the situation with Major in Iraq, the conflict with Lieutenant Commander Williams during the joint training exercise, the formal complaint filed by Captain after the embassy security assignment. Do you see a pattern here? Harrison's face had gone pale. Those incidents were all documented in his personnel file, but hearing them listed so matter-of-factly drove home just how serious his situation had become. Every single one of those incidents involved you challenging the authority of a superior officer based on personal characteristics rather than professional competence, Sarah continued. Gender, race, age, background, something about them didn't fit your image of what a leader should be, so you decided they weren't worthy of your respect. That's not, Harrison started to protest. It's exactly what happened, Sarah cut him off, and it stops here today right now. She stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the training grounds where other units were conducting their morning exercises. Here's what's going to happen, Gunnery Sergeant. You're going to continue as part of this team, but under very specific conditions. First, you will treat me with the same respect you would show any commanding officer. Second, you will extend that same respect to every member of this unit, regardless of rank, gender, or any other personal characteristic. Third, you will participate in mandatory counseling sessions to address your behavioral issues. Harrison's face reddened. Counseling I don't need. You do, Sarah said firmly, turning back to face him. And if you refuse, or if you have another incident like Friday night, I will personally ensure that you face formal charges for every violation in your file, including the one that happened under my command. Is that clear? The threat was delivered in the same calm, professional tone Sarah had used throughout the conversation, but its implications were unmistakable. Harrison was looking at the potential end of his military career, and they both knew it. Yes, ma'am, he said finally. Good, Sarah replied. Now let's talk about your role in the upcoming mission. Harrison looked surprised. After everything that had been said, he had expected to be sidelined or removed from operational duties entirely. You're going to be responsible for security coordination and backup planning, Sarah explained. Your job will be to ensure that our primary team has multiple extraction routes, contingency plans for every scenario we can anticipate, and rapid response capabilities if things go sideways. It was a significant responsibility, one that would put Harrison in a position of trust despite his recent behavior. Sarah could see him struggling to understand why she was offering him this opportunity. Why, he asked finally. Because despite your personal issues, you're good at your job, Sarah replied honestly. And because this mission is too important to let personality conflicts compromise our effectiveness. But understand this, Gunnery Sergeant, this is your last chance. If you prove that you can work as part of this team and follow proper chain of command, then we move forward together. If not. She didn't need to finish the sentence. The implications were clear enough. Harrison nodded slowly. I understand, ma'am. Do you? Because I want to be absolutely certain we're on the same page here. Your behavior Friday night wasn't just inappropriate, it was dangerous. In our line of work, the inability to respect authority or work effectively with diverse personnel can get people killed. I won't tolerate that kind of risk on my team. Yes, ma'am, I understand. Sarah studied his face for a moment longer, then nodded. All right then. Report to Dr. Stevens in the psychology unit at 1400 hours today for your first counseling session. Your security planning assignment begins immediately. I want preliminary assessments on my desk by 800 tomorrow. Harrison stood up, clearly eager to escape the uncomfortable conversation. Yes, ma'am, will that be all? Actually, no, Sarah said. There's one more thing. The woman you harassed Friday night, did you ever find out who she was? Harrison shook his head. No, ma'am, she left before I could get her name. Sarah smiled slightly. She was lieutenant commander from Naval Intelligence. She's been selected to work with our team as a cultural liaison for the upcoming mission. You'll be seeing her again very soon. The color drained from Harrison's face as the implications sank in. Not only had he assaulted his commanding officer, but he had also harassed another officer who would be working closely with the team. The holes he had dug for himself just kept getting deeper. I suggest you prepare yourself to make a very sincere apology, Sarah added. Lieutenant Commander's cooperation will be essential to mission success, and your past behavior has already created complications that we'll need to address. Harrison nodded wordlessly, apparently no longer trusting his voice. Dismissed Gunnery Sergeant. As Harrison left the ready room, Sarah allowed herself a moment to process what had just happened. The confrontation had gone better than she had hoped, but she remained skeptical about Harrison's ability to truly change his attitudes. Men like him often paid lip service to reform while continuing to harbor the same resentments and prejudices that had caused problems in the first place. But she had given him a chance, which was more than most commanders would have done. Now it was up to him to prove whether he deserved it. Sarah gathered her materials and headed for her office, where she had a mountain of administrative tasks waiting for her attention. Taking command of any unit involved an enormous amount of paperwork, briefings, and coordination with various support elements. But she also had a mission to plan, and the complexities of the AL operation would require careful preparation and innovative thinking. Her office was located in the command section of the building, a corner space that offered views of both the training grounds and the harbor beyond. The previous commander had left it furnished, with just the basic desk, chairs, and filing cabinets required for official business. Sarah made a mental note to add some personal touches once she had time to settle in properly. The first item on her agenda was a meeting with Lieutenant Commander, who had arrived on base that morning and was waiting to be briefed on her role in the upcoming operation. Sarah was curious to see how would react to learning about Harrison's involvement in the mission, especially given their unpleasant first encounter. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Come in. Ma'am, Lieutenant Commander is here for her briefing, announced Petty Officer Martinez, who was serving as her temporary administrative assistant. Send her in, please. Entered the office with the confident bearing of an experienced intelligence officer. She was in her early 30s, with sharp features and alert eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her surroundings. Her handshake was firm, and her greeting was professionally cordial. Commander Martinez, thank you for seeing me on such short notice. Please have a seat, Sarah replied, gesturing to the chairs in front of her desk. I understand you've been briefed on the general parameters of our mission. Yes, ma'am. Cultural infiltration of Al's social network for intelligence gathering purposes. I've been studying his background and known associates for the past week. Excellent, and what's your assessment of our chances for success? Consider the question carefully. Promising, but challenging. Al is known to be paranoid about security, but he also has specific weaknesses we can exploit. His ego is considerable, and he enjoys being seen with attractive, sophisticated women who can enhance his reputation in social circles. Which is where you come in, Sarah said. Exactly. My background gives me several options for establishing contact. I speak fluent Arabic and Farsi, I have extensive knowledge of Middle Eastern culture and politics, and I can credibly present myself as anything from a wealthy socialite to an art dealer to a journalist, depending on what the situation requires. Sarah was impressed by his confidence and preparation. Have you considered the risks involved? This won't be a standard intelligence gathering operation. You'll be in close proximity to a dangerous individual with no immediate backup and limited communication options. I understand the risks, ma'am. I've operated in similar situations before, though admittedly not with quite this level of complexity. Good, now there's something else we need to discuss. Something that might complicate your working relationship with certain members of the team. Raised an eyebrow. Oh. Sarah leaned back in her chair, considering how best to approach the subject. I understand you had an unpleasant encounter at Murphy's Steakhouse on Friday night. His expression darkened slightly. Yes, I did. some Marine who apparently thinks harassment is an acceptable form of social interaction. That Marine is Gunnery Sergeant Harrison, and he's currently assigned to this team for the duration of our mission. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. His face went through several expressions before settling on professional composure tinged with irritation. "I see," she said finally. "And how exactly is that going to work?" "Very carefully," Sarah replied. "Harrison has been disciplined for his behavior, and he's been ordered to make formal apologies to both of us. He's also been assigned to counseling and placed on notice that any further incidents will result in formal charges." "Both of us?" asked, clearly confused. Sarah smiled slightly. "The woman he harassed first was me. I was observing the team in an informal setting before taking command." Stared at her for a moment, then began to laugh. "You're kidding." "I'm afraid not. Apparently, your gunnery Sergeant Harrison has a talent for creating complicated situations." "Well," said, still chuckling, "I have to admit that makes this interesting. How did he react when he found out who you were?" "About as well as you'd expect. I think the phrase deer in headlights would be appropriate." "I almost feel sorry for him," said, "almost." "The question is whether you can work with him in a professional capacity," Sarah said, becoming more serious. "I know it's an uncomfortable situation, but his skills are genuinely valuable to this operation. If you can't get past Friday night, I need to know now so we can make alternative arrangements." Considered this for a moment. "As long as he behaves himself and follows proper chain of command, I can work with him. But I want it understood that I won't tolerate any further harassment or disrespect." "That's already been made clear to him," Sarah assured her. "And if he steps out of line again, he'll be facing formal charges immediately." "Then we shouldn't have any problems," said. "When do I get to meet the rest of the team?" "This afternoon. I've scheduled a full briefing at 1400 hours to go over mission specifics and team assignments. Everyone will be there, including Harrison." "Should be interesting," murmured. "Indeed. Now, let's talk about your operational cover and the logistics of making contact with Al." For the next hour, Sarah worked through the details of the infiltration plan. Would establish herself in Monaco, where Al was known to frequent several exclusive casinos and social clubs. Her cover identity would be that of a wealthy American art collector with interests in Middle Eastern antiquities, a background that would give her both the financial credibility to move in Al's circles and the cultural knowledge to engage him in meaningful conversation. The plan was ambitious and risky. Would need to make contact, establish a relationship, gain Al's trust, and extract sensitive information about his operational plans, all while maintaining her cover and avoiding the security measures that surrounded him. A single mistake could result in her death and the complete failure of the mission. "The key," Sarah explained, "is patience. We can't rush this. If Al suspects anything, he'll disappear and we'll never get another chance at him." "Understood. How long are we prepared to maintain the operation?" "As long as it takes, within reason. Command has given us a 6-month window, but obviously we'd prefer to wrap this up sooner if possible." Nodded. 6 months should be more than enough time, assuming I can make initial contact within the first few weeks. "About that," Sarah said, "I have some ideas that might help expedite the process. I've been studying Al's patterns, and I think there's a specific event coming up that could provide the perfect opportunity for introduction." She handed a file containing detailed information about a charity auction scheduled to take place in Monaco in 2 weeks. Al is known to attend events like this, especially when they involve Middle Eastern art or cultural artifacts. If you can position yourself as both a bidder and a donor, it would give you multiple opportunities for interaction. Studied the information with growing interest. "This is perfect. An art auction would allow me to demonstrate both wealth and cultural sophistication, and if I can arrange to bid on some of the same items he's interested in." "Exactly. A little friendly competition, some knowledgeable conversation about the pieces, perhaps a suggestion that you have other items in your private collection that might interest him. And from there, an invitation to view that collection privately. Or better yet, an invitation for him to show you his collection. Men like Al love to display their wealth and cultural superiority." Was clearly excited by the possibilities. "This could work very well. I'll need to establish a detailed background for my collector persona, arrange for suitable accommodations and transportation in Monaco, and prepare for extensive conversation about Middle Eastern art history. All of that can be arranged through intelligence channels. The more important question is whether you're comfortable with the level of personal risk involved. Once you make contact with Al, you'll essentially be on your own. His expression became serious. I understand the risks, ma'am, but this is exactly the kind of operation I've trained for, and given the potential intelligence value. The risks are worth it, Sarah finished. I agree, but I want you to know that if at any point you feel the situation is becoming too dangerous, you have full authority to abort the mission. No intelligence is worth losing an agent. Thank you, ma'am. That's reassuring to know. Sarah checked her watch. We still have a few hours before the team briefing. I suggest you use that time to familiarize yourself with the operational profiles of the team members. Understanding their capabilities and specialties will help you work more effectively with them during the planning phase. Will do. Is there anything specific I should know about working with SEALs? Sarah smiled. They're extremely competent, highly trained, and absolutely committed to mission success. But they're also used to direct action operations where problems are solved with superior firepower and aggressive tactics. This mission will require a much more subtle approach, and some of them may need time to adjust to that. And Harrison? Harrison is a complication, but potentially a valuable one. His security and tactical expertise could be crucial if things go wrong. Just remember that he's being closely monitored, and any inappropriate behavior will be dealt with immediately. Nodded, I'll keep that in mind. As left the office, Sarah found herself cautiously optimistic about the mission's prospects. Was clearly competent and experienced, and her cultural background and intelligence training made her ideal for this type of operation. The team's capabilities were exceptional, despite the personality issues they would need to navigate. The real challenge would be coordinating all the different elements: intelligence gathering, tactical support, operational security, and contingency planning, into a coherent whole that could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining the level of subtlety the mission required. Sarah spent the remaining time before the team briefing reviewing intelligence reports and refining the operational timeline. Al's movements were predictable enough to allow for strategic planning, but unpredictable enough to require flexibility and quick thinking. The margin for error was essentially zero. At exactly 1400 hours, Sarah made her way back to the ready room where her team was assembled. Was already there, sitting slightly apart from the SEALs as she reviewed her notes. Harrison was present as well, his posture rigid and his expression carefully neutral. Stood as Sarah entered, teams all present and accounted for, ma'am. Thank you, Lieutenant Commander. Please, everyone be seated. Sarah moved to the front of the room and activated the large display screen. Lieutenant Commander, let's talk about how we're going to take down Al. The next 2 hours would determine whether this unlikely collection of personalities could work together effectively enough to pull off one of the most challenging operations any of them had ever attempted. The ready room fell silent as Sarah activated the display screen, revealing a detailed map of Monaco with various locations marked in different colors. Intelligence photographs of Al appeared alongside the map, showing him at various social gatherings, always impeccably dressed and surrounded by beautiful women and wealthy associates. For the past 18 months, Sarah began, Al has been operating out of Monaco and the surrounding French Riviera. Intelligence suggests he's using his legitimate business interests as a cover for coordinating terrorist activities across the Mediterranean region. She clicked to the next slide, showing Al's known properties and frequent haunts. He owns a villa in the hills above Monte Carlo, maintains a yacht in the harbor, and has been seen regularly at approximately a dozen high-end establishments. His security is professional but not overwhelming, typically 2 to 4 bodyguards, with additional security at his residence and aboard his yacht. Studied the photographs intently. What's his background? How did a terrorist operative get so wealthy? Legitimate business, mostly, answered. His family owns several shipping companies and has extensive real estate holdings throughout the Middle East. Al inherited a fortune and has used his legitimate business activities to fund and coordinate terrorist operations. The perfect cover, Williams observed. Rich playboy with a taste for luxury. Nobody looks too closely at his activities because they assume he's just another wealthy dilettante. Exactly, Sarah confirmed, which is both our advantage and our challenge. His lifestyle makes him accessible, but his wealth and social connections also provide him with protection and early warning systems. Leaned forward, what's the specific intelligence we're after? Sarah clicked to a new slide showing a timeline of recent terrorist activities. 3 major attacks in the past 6 months, all showing signs of sophisticated coordination and advanced intelligence. We believe Al is the central coordinator, but we need to know about planned operations, funding sources, and the identities of other cell leaders. And the traditional intelligence gathering methods haven't worked, Johnson asked. Electronic surveillance is limited due to his security measures, Sarah explained. Human intelligence has failed because his inner circle consists entirely of family members and longtime associates. He doesn't trust outsiders with sensitive information. So we need to become insiders, said. Precisely, which brings us to our operational plan. Sarah clicked to the next slide, showing the charity auction event in Monaco. In 12 days, there will be a major auction of Middle Eastern antiquities at the Casino Monte Carlo. Al is virtually certain to attend. He's a serious collector, and several pieces from his personal collection are being featured. She looked directly at. Lieutenant Commander will establish herself as Doctor, a wealthy American art collector with a particular interest in ancient Persian artifacts. Her cover identity has been meticulously constructed, complete with a verifiable background, financial records, and a reputation in international art circles. Took over the briefing, moving to stand beside the display. Doctor's background includes a D in art history from Yale, membership in several prestigious collector organizations, and documented purchases of similar artifacts over the past 5 years. Her financial profile shows inherited wealth from family oil interests in Texas, giving her the credibility to compete with other serious collectors. How do you plan to make contact with Al? Martinez asked. Carefully, replied with a slight smile. The key is to become someone he wants to know, rather than someone who obviously wants to know him. At the auction, I'll be bidding on several items, including at least one piece that I know he's interested in. The goal is to create a situation where we end up in competitive bidding. Nodded slowly, and then Doctor graciously concedes the item to him, compliments his taste, and perhaps mentions that she has similar pieces in her private collection that she'd be happy to show him. Assuming he takes the bait, Williams said. He will, said confidently. Al's psychological profile shows he can't resist opportunities to display his wealth and cultural sophistication, especially to attractive women who can appreciate his taste. Harrison spoke for the first time since the briefing began. What about security, both his and yours? Sarah was pleased to see him participating professionally, despite the obvious tension in the room. Good question, Gunnery Sergeant. That's where the rest of the team comes in. She clicked to a new slide showing detailed floor plans of the casino and surrounding area. The team will be positioned throughout Monaco in various cover identities. Lieutenant Commander and Petty Officer will be posing as security consultants for a wealthy American businessman who's attending the auction. Who's the businessman? Asked. Me, Sarah replied. I'll be Dr. Sarah Blackwood, a Silicon Valley entrepreneur with interests in technology investments and art collection. My presence gives us a legitimate reason to have security personnel in the area, and it provides backup for Lieutenant Commander if things go wrong. Studied the floor plans. What about extraction procedures? Multiple contingencies, Sarah assured him. Chief Williams will be positioned as a casino employee with access to service areas and emergency exits. Petty Officers Martinez and Johnson will maintain mobile surveillance and communication relay positions throughout the city. She clicked to the next slide, showing detailed escape routes and safe house locations. If Lieutenant Commander needs immediate extraction, we have 6 different routes planned, each with backup transportation and communication protocols. And if Al becomes suspicious, Harrison asked. Sarah turned to face him directly. That's where your expertise becomes crucial, Gunnery Sergeant. You'll be responsible for coordinating rapid response capabilities. If our primary plan fails, we need to be prepared for everything from diplomatic complications to armed confrontation. Harrison nodded slowly. What resources will I have available? A full tactical support team positioned just outside Monaco's territorial limits. naval assets in the Mediterranean, and emergency diplomatic protocols through the American Embassy in Nice. Studied the operational timeline. How long are we prepared to maintain the operation once contact is established? As long as necessary, Sarah replied. Once you're inside Al's social circle, the intelligence opportunities could continue for months, but we're also prepared to extract you immediately if the situation becomes too dangerous. Define too dangerous, said. Sarah's expression became serious. If Al discovers real identity, she'll be killed, probably slowly and painfully. If he suspects she's gathering intelligence but isn't sure, he might try to feed her false information or use her as an unwitting asset. If he's planning to leave Monaco or if he receives warning about our operation, we'll need to abort immediately. The sobering reality of the mission settled over the room like a heavy blanket. This wasn't a direct action raid where success or failure would be determined quickly. This was a long-term infiltration operation where a single mistake could have catastrophic consequences. There's another factor we need to consider, added. Al's personal relationships. Intelligence suggests he's currently involved with at least 2 different women, both of whom are likely being used as intelligence assets by various parties. I'll need to navigate those relationships carefully to avoid creating conflicts that could expose my own mission. Meaning asked. Meaning Doctor needs to be interested in Al's art collection and cultural knowledge, not in Al himself. At least not initially. I can't afford to be seen as a romantic rival by women who might have their own agendas. Was studying the psychological profile of their target. According to this, Al is extremely intelligent. How confident are we that he won't see through the deception? Very confident, Sarah replied. But not because he isn't smart enough to figure it out, because his ego makes him want to believe that sophisticated, wealthy women find him fascinating. Doctor's background has been designed to appeal to exactly that weakness. Williams raised his hand slightly. What's our communication protocol once is inside? Limited and carefully scheduled, Sarah answered. Too much communication increases the risk of detection. We'll have access to emergency extraction signals, but routine intelligence reports will be transmitted only at predetermined intervals through secure channels. How often? Johnson asked. Every 72 hours unless there's immediate actionable intelligence or a security concern. The room was quiet as the team absorbed the complexity of what they were being asked to do. This operation would require patience, subtlety, and a level of coordination that went far beyond their usual tactical missions. I know this is different from your normal operations, Sarah said, addressing the group's obvious concerns. But it's exactly the kind of mission where special operations forces can make a real difference in the intelligence war. Al has information that could prevent future terrorist attacks and save American lives. Traditional methods have failed, so we're going to try something new. She paused to make eye contact with each team member. I won't lie to you, this is dangerous. Not just for Lieutenant Commander, but for all of us. If this operation is compromised, the diplomatic ramifications alone could end careers. But the potential intelligence value makes the risk worthwhile. Stood up, ma'am, when do we deploy? Advanced team leaves in 48 hours to begin establishing cover identities and surveillance positions. Lieutenant Commander and I will arrive in Monaco 4 days before the auction to finalize preparations. Sarah clicked off the display and moved back to the front of the room. Questions? Harrison raised his hand. Ma'am, I'd like to request permission to make a formal apology to Lieutenant Commander for my behavior on Friday night. The request caught everyone by surprise, including herself. Sarah studied Harrison's face, looking for signs of insincerity or resentment, but his expression appeared genuinely contrite. Lieutenant Commander, Sarah asked, are you willing to hear Gunnery Sergeant Harrison's apology? Looked uncomfortable but nodded. I'm willing to listen. Harrison stood up and faced directly. Ma'am, my behavior Friday night was completely inappropriate and unbecoming of a Marine. I had no right to touch you without permission, and I had no right to speak to you in the manner that I did. I allowed alcohol and personal prejudices to override my professional judgment and military bearing. He paused, clearly struggling with what to say next. I know that my actions created a hostile environment for you and potentially compromised team cohesion for this mission. I want you to know that I deeply regret my behavior, and I'm committed to ensuring it never happens again. The apology was more thorough and seemingly sincere than Sarah had expected. Studied Harrison's face for a long moment before responding. Thank you for the apology, Gunnery Sergeant. I appreciate your willingness to acknowledge that your behavior was inappropriate. Harrison nodded. Ma'am, I'd also like to request permission to prove my commitment to this team through my actions rather than just my words. What did you have in mind? Sarah asked. I'd like to volunteer for the most dangerous assignment available. If my past behavior has created trust issues, I want to demonstrate that I'm willing to put the mission and team safety ahead of my own interests. Sarah was genuinely surprised by the offer. This wasn't the response she had expected from someone who had been forced into counseling and threatened with formal charges. The most dangerous assignment is Lieutenant Commander's, Sarah pointed out. She's the one who will be isolated and vulnerable. Then I'd like to be her primary backup, Harrison said. If something goes wrong, I want to be the one responsible for getting her out safely. The room was completely silent. Everyone understood the implications of what Harrison was proposing. If was discovered or compromised, any rescue attempt would likely be suicidal. He was essentially volunteering for a mission that would probably end with his death. Looked at Harrison with new interest. Why would you do that? Harrison met her gaze steadily. Because it's the right thing to do, and because I owe you a debt that can only be repaid through action, not words. Sarah found herself reassessing her opinion of the Marine. This wasn't the response of someone who was simply trying to avoid punishment. This was the response of someone who genuinely understood the magnitude of his mistakes and was willing to risk everything to make amends. That's a generous offer, Gunnery Sergeant, Sarah said carefully, but backup operations require someone who can think clearly under pressure and work effectively with the person they're protecting. Are you confident you can do that? Yes, ma'am, completely confident. Sarah looked at, It's your call, Lieutenant Commander. You're the one who will be depending on him if things go wrong. Studied Harrison for a long moment, clearly weighing his sincerity against her memories of Friday night's incident. Finally, she nodded slowly. I'm willing to work with Gunnery Sergeant Harrison in a professional capacity, she said. But I want it understood that our working relationship is based entirely on mission requirements, not personal forgiveness. Understood, Harrison replied. I'm grateful for the opportunity to prove myself. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and continued concern. Harrison's willingness to volunteer for the most dangerous assignment was encouraging, but she remained skeptical about his ability to truly change his fundamental attitudes. Still, this was progress, and in their line of work, sometimes progress was the best you could hope for. All right then, she said to the group. We have our assignments and our timeline. The next 10 days will be critical for finalizing preparations and ensuring everyone understands their roles. Lieutenant Commander, I want detailed contingency plans for every phase of the operation. Chief Williams, coordinate with intelligence to ensure our technical capabilities are in place. Gunnery Sergeant Harrison, I want preliminary security assessments for all locations within 24 hours. She turned to, Lieutenant Commander, you and I will spend tomorrow going over your cover identity in detail. Every aspect of Doctor's background needs to be perfect. One inconsistency could blow the entire operation. The team began gathering their materials, but Sarah held up a hand to stop them. One more thing. This operation is classified at the highest levels. You don't discuss it with anyone outside this room, not friends, not family, not other personnel on base. The success of this mission and the safety of everyone involved depends on absolute operational security. She paused to look at each person individually. If anyone has personal issues that might interfere with their ability to maintain that security, now is the time to speak up. Once we deploy, there's no going back. No one spoke. These were professionals who understood the implications of classified operations and the consequences of security breaches. Excellent. We'll meet again tomorrow at 800 to begin detailed operational planning. Dismissed. As the team filed out of the ready room, Sarah noticed hanging back. Once they were alone, approached her with a thoughtful expression. Can I speak freely, ma'am? Of course. I'm impressed by Harrison's apology and his willingness to volunteer for dangerous duty, but I'm still concerned about his psychological fitness for this kind of operation. Sarah nodded. Your concerns are noted and shared. What specific issues worry you most? Men with his type of prejudices often have difficulty following orders from women when the pressure is on, explained. In a crisis situation, will he be able to set aside his personal feelings and follow my lead? It was a valid concern. High-stress situations had a way of stripping away superficial behavioral changes and revealing people's true character. I've given that a lot of thought, Sarah replied. Part of the reason I'm allowing him to volunteer is that it gives us a chance to test his commitment under controlled circumstances. If he shows signs of reverting to his old patterns during training exercises, we'll know he's not ready for the real thing. And if he doesn't show those signs during training, but reverts under operational pressure, then you have full authority to remove him from the equation by whatever means necessary, Sarah said bluntly. Your safety and mission success take priority over his redemption. Nodded, apparently satisfied with that answer. Thank you for being direct about that, ma'am. It helps to know where the boundaries are. Lieutenant Commander, Sarah said as headed for the door, I want you to know that I have complete confidence in your ability to handle this mission. You have extensive experience, excellent training, and sound judgment. Trust your instincts and don't hesitate to abort if anything feels wrong. Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down. After left, Sarah remained in the ready room for several minutes, reviewing the operational timeline and considering all the potential complications that could arise. The mission was ambitious and risky, but it was also the kind of operation that could provide intelligence breakthroughs that would save lives and prevent future attacks. The human element was always the most unpredictable factor in operations like this. Technology could be tested, and procedures could be rehearsed and refined, but people remained wildly variable under pressure. Harrison's apparent change of heart was encouraging, but Sarah had seen too many people revert to their worst instincts when faced with life-and-death situations. Still, the mission had to proceed. The intelligence value was too great, and the window of opportunity was too narrow to wait for perfect circumstances. They would work with the team they had and adapt to whatever challenges arose. Sarah gathered her materials and headed back to her office, where she had several hours of detailed planning work ahead of her. The next 10 days would be crucial for ensuring that every member of the team was prepared for the complexities and dangers they would face. As she settled behind her desk and opened the first of many files that needed her attention, Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Despite the challenges and personality conflicts, she had managed to forge a functional team from disparate elements. Harrison's apparent willingness to change was a bonus, but even if he reverted to his old patterns, the mission could still succeed. The real test would come in Monaco, where the margin for error was zero, and the consequences of failure could be measured in lives lost and intelligence opportunities destroyed forever. But Sarah had confidence in her team's abilities and her own judgment. It was going to be an interesting 2 weeks. The following morning brought a new energy to the team's preparations. Harrison arrived early and had preliminary security assessments ready before the scheduled meeting time. Had spent the night reviewing art history materials and cultural information that would support her cover identity. The SEALs had begun the detailed tactical planning that would be essential for supporting the infiltration operation. Sarah reviewed Harrison's security assessments with growing respect for his thoroughness and attention to detail. Despite his personal issues, he was clearly an experienced professional who understood the complexities of operational security. His plans included contingencies that even she hadn't considered, and his analysis of potential threats was both comprehensive and realistic. This is excellent work, Gunnery Sergeant, she told him during their morning briefing. How confident are you about the extraction procedures? Very confident about the primary and secondary routes, Harrison replied. The tertiary routes depend on factors we can't control, like local law enforcement response times and diplomatic negotiations. But I've built in enough flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances. And if Lieutenant Commander's cover is blown, but she can't reach any of the planned extraction points. Harrison's expression became grim. Then we go to emergency protocols, full tactical assault to create a distraction while a separate team extracts her from whatever location she's being held. That would mean abandoning any pretense of deniability, Sarah pointed out. Yes, ma'am, but it would also mean bringing our agent home alive. Sarah found herself increasingly impressed by Harrison's professional competence and his apparent commitment to the mission. The transformation from Friday night's belligerent behavior to today's focused professionalism was remarkable, though she remained cautious about assuming it was permanent. The day's training exercises would provide a better test of Harrison's ability to work effectively with and follow her lead in simulated crisis situations. If he could manage that successfully, Sarah would be much more confident about his deployment to Monaco. As the team gathered for their first full operational rehearsal, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and concern that preceded every major mission. They had excellent personnel, solid planning, and clear objectives. Now they needed to prove they could work together effectively under pressure. The next few hours would reveal whether her gamble on Harrison's redemption had been wise, or whether she had allowed compassion to override her better judgment. Either way, they were committed now. The mission would proceed, and they would all have to live with the consequences of their choices. 3 weeks later, the operation had exceeded everyone's expectations. Lieutenant Commander, fully immersed in her role as doctor, had not only made contact with Al but had become a regular fixture in his social circle. The intelligence she had gathered was already proving invaluable, revealing a network of terrorist operations far more extensive than anyone had imagined. But success had come with complications that no amount of planning could have anticipated. Sarah stood on the balcony of her Monaco hotel suite, watching the sun set over the Mediterranean while reviewing the latest intelligence report. The information was extraordinary, detailed financial records, operational plans for 3 separate attacks, and the identities of key players throughout Al's network. It was exactly what they had hoped to achieve. The problem was that was no longer just gathering intelligence. She had become Al's most trusted confidant, and he was beginning to involve her in operational planning that went far beyond passive observation. The opportunity to prevent multiple terrorist attacks was enormous, but so were the risks. "Ma'am's voice came through her encrypted communication device. "We have a problem." Sarah moved inside and activated the secure video link that connected her to the team's command post in a rented villa on the outskirts of Monaco. His face appeared on screen, his expression grim. "What's the situation?" she asked. "Missed her scheduled check-in 6 hours ago. We've had no communication since her last report yesterday morning." Sarah felt her stomach clench. Missing a scheduled communication was their first warning sign that an agent might be in trouble. Any indication of compromise? "Nothing obvious. Our surveillance teams report that Al's security hasn't changed, and his routine activities have continued normally. But we can't locate anywhere in the usual areas." Sarah checked her watch. Was supposed to have attended a dinner party at Al's villa, followed by a private viewing of some new acquisitions for his art collection. The fact that she hadn't reported in afterward was deeply concerning. "What about emergency signals?" Sarah asked. "Negative, no distress signals, no abort codes, nothing through any of our backup channels." Sarah felt the familiar weight of command responsibility settling on her shoulders. Could be dead, captured, or simply unable to communicate due to circumstances beyond her control. Each possibility required different responses, and choosing the wrong one could be catastrophic. "I want all surveillance assets focused on Al's properties," she ordered. "Find out where he is and what he's doing. If he's with him, I need to know her status immediately." "Already in progress," replied. "And Martinez are monitoring the villa, Johnson has eyes on the yacht, and Williams is tracking his vehicle movements through the city's security camera network." "Good, what about Harrison?" His expression became complicated. "That's another issue we need to discuss." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "He's been monitoring Al's communications for any indication that cover has been blown. 20 minutes ago, he intercepted a phone conversation that suggests Al is planning to leave Monaco tonight." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. If Al was planning to leave suddenly, it could mean he had discovered's true identity and was either taking her with him as a prisoner or preparing to eliminate her before escaping. Either way, they were rapidly running out of time. "Where is Harrison now?" "That's the problem," said reluctantly. "He's not responding to communication either. We think he's initiated some kind of unauthorized action." Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. This was exactly what she had feared. that Harrison's past behavioral issues would resurface under pressure and compromise the entire operation. "When did you last have contact with him?" 45 minutes ago. He was in position at the monitoring station when he intercepted the communication. When tried to reach him for an update 10 minutes later, Harrison was gone. Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. Harrison could have panicked and abandoned his position. He could have decided that needed immediate rescue and gone in alone. Or he could have reverted to his old patterns of insubordination and decided to handle the situation his own way. "I need eyes on all of Al's locations immediately," she ordered. "If Harrison is planning some kind of rescue attempt, we need to coordinate with him before he ruins everything." "Ma'am," said carefully, "there's something else you should know about that intercepted communication." "What?" It wasn't in English or Arabic. Harrison was monitoring a secure satellite phone connection, and the conversation was in Russian. Sarah stared at the screen as the implication sank in. If Al was communicating in Russian, it suggested connections to intelligence services that went far beyond simple terrorist coordination. This operation had just become significantly more complex and dangerous. "Get me a full transcript of that conversation as soon as possible," she ordered. "And find Harrison. If he's planning to go after alone, he's walking into a situation he doesn't understand." The communication ended, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and a growing sense that the operation was spiraling out of control. Every successful mission required adaptability and quick thinking, but this was beginning to feel like improvisation rather than tactical adjustment. Her encrypted phone buzzed with an incoming message. The sender was listed as an unknown number, but when she opened it, her blood ran cold. "Dr. Blackwood," the message read, using her cover identity, "I believe we have a mutual friend who is eager to see you. Join us for dinner aboard my yacht at 2200 hours. Come alone, or Dr. Art appreciation studies will come to a very abrupt end." There was no signature, but Sarah knew immediately who had sent it. Al had, and he was using her as bait to draw Sarah into whatever trap he had prepared. The question was whether was still alive, and whether Sarah's appearance would help or hinder any rescue attempts that might already be in progress. She forwarded the message with instructions to maintain surveillance, but not to interfere unless she specifically requested backup. Then she began preparing for what was likely to be the most dangerous meeting of her career. Sarah chose her outfit carefully, elegant enough to maintain her cover as a wealthy art collector, but practical enough to allow for combat if necessary. The small pistol hidden in her purse was probably useless against Al's security, but it provided some psychological comfort. More importantly, she activated the emergency transmitter that would allow her team to track her location and monitor her vital signs. As she made her way through Monaco's narrow streets toward the harbor, Sarah's mind focused on the tactical challenges ahead. Al clearly knew more about their operation than he had revealed to, but the extent of his knowledge was unclear. He might know that Dr. Blackwood was connected to Doctor's intelligence gathering, or he might have discovered both of their true identities completely. The yacht was exactly where intelligence reports had indicated it would be, a massive luxury vessel that could have passed for a small cruise ship. Security was visible but not overwhelming, suggesting either supreme confidence or a very sophisticated trap. Sarah approached the gangway with the confident bearing of someone who belonged there, despite the churning anxiety in her stomach. "Dr. Blackwood," greeted a tall man in an expensive suit who was clearly one of Al's lieutenants. "Mr. Al is expecting you." Sarah nodded graciously and allowed herself to be escorted aboard the yacht. The interior was even more luxurious than the exterior suggested. Original artwork adorned the walls, Persian carpets covered polished floors, and crystal chandeliers provided warm, ambient lighting. It was exactly the kind of environment where a wealthy art collector would feel comfortable. Al was waiting in the main salon, dressed in a perfectly tailored dinner jacket and holding a glass of what appeared to be expensive champagne. He was more physically impressive in person than his photographs suggested, tall, handsome, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. "Dr. Blackwood," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "How wonderful to finally meet you properly. Doctor has told me so much about your business partnership." "Mr. Al," Sarah replied, maintaining her cover identity while scanning the room for any sign of. "The pleasure is mutual. speaks very highly of your cultural expertise. Is a remarkable woman, Al said, gesturing for Sarah to take a seat. So knowledgeable about art history, so passionate about cultural preservation. It's rare to meet someone who truly understands the importance of maintaining connections to our shared human heritage. The conversation was civilized and cultured, but Sarah could sense the predatory intelligence underneath Al's polished exterior. This was a man who had built a reputation for sophisticated brutality, and his current hospitality was likely a prelude to something far less pleasant. I hope is well, Sarah said carefully. I was expecting to meet her here this evening. Oh, she's perfectly fine, Al assured her. Just resting in one of the guest cabins. She had rather too much wine with dinner and needed to lie down for a while. It was a plausible explanation, but Sarah's instincts told her there was much more to the story. I'd love to see her if she's feeling up to visitors. Of course, Al replied smoothly. But first, I was hoping we could discuss some business matters. I understand you have connections in the American technology industry that might be useful for certain projects I'm considering. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. If Al was trying to recruit her for legitimate business dealings, it suggested he didn't know her true identity. But if he was probing for information about American technology capabilities, it could indicate a much more serious security breach. I'm always interested in new investment opportunities, she said neutrally. What kind of projects were you considering? For the next 30 minutes, Al outlined what appeared to be legitimate technology ventures: communication systems, shipping logistics, financial services platforms. The proposals were sophisticated and potentially profitable, exactly the kind of investments that would appeal to someone with Dr. Blackwood's background. But Sarah noticed subtle details that suggested a different agenda. The communication systems he described would be ideal for coordinating clandestine operations. The shipping logistics could easily facilitate weapons smuggling, and the financial platforms would provide perfect cover for moving terrorist funding. These are fascinating opportunities, Sarah said when Al finished his presentation. I'd need to review detailed proposals and conduct due diligence, of course. Naturally, Al agreed. I wouldn't expect someone of your caliber to make investment decisions without thorough analysis, but I hope you understand that certain aspects of these projects require discretion. There it was, the invitation into activities that couldn't bear close scrutiny. Sarah realized she was being recruited not just as an investor, but as an unwitting participant in terrorist operations. I appreciate the need for confidentiality in competitive markets, she replied carefully. My business success has always depended on my ability to maintain appropriate discretion. Al's smile became more genuine. Excellent. I think we're going to work very well together, Dr. Blackwood, and now perhaps you'd like to see, I believe she should be feeling much better by now. As Al led her through the yacht's corridors toward the guest accommodations, Sarah activated the emergency signal that would alert her team to her current status. Whatever happened next, they would at least know where to find her. The guest cabin Al indicated was at the end of a narrow corridor, with only one exit route. Sarah's tactical training immediately recognized it as a potential trap, but she had no choice but to follow his lead. Al knocked gently on the cabin door. Dr. Blackwood is here to see you. The door opened, and Sarah found herself face to face with, who was very much awake and alert, despite Al's claims about too much wine. Eyes met Sarah's for just a moment, and in that brief contact, Sarah saw a warning that made her blood run cold. Sarah exclaimed with perfectly feigned enthusiasm, "How wonderful to see you! Please come in." As Sarah stepped into the cabin, she realized immediately that something was terribly wrong. Was moving too carefully, her smile was too bright, and there was a subtle tension in her posture that suggested she was under some form of duress. "I'll leave you ladies to catch up," Al said pleasantly. "Dinner will be served in 30 minutes. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Sarah heard the unmistakable sound of a lock engaging. They were trapped. Sarah said carefully, maintaining their cover identities even though she was certain the cabin was monitored, "You look tired. Are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine," replied, moving to the cabin's small sitting area. "Just a little overwhelmed by all the cultural activities. Mr. Al has been showing me some truly remarkable pieces from his private collection." The emphasis on private collection was subtle but deliberate. was trying to communicate something specific about what she had discovered. For the next few minutes, they maintained an innocuous conversation about art and cultural activities, while Sarah tried to assess their situation. The cabin was luxuriously appointed, but clearly designed to contain rather than comfort its occupants. The portholes were too small for escape, the door was reinforced, and there were no obvious weapons or tools available. But there was something else in the cabin, something that made Sarah's breath catch when she finally noticed it. Sitting on a small table near the bed was a ceramic figurine that looked innocuous to casual observation, but which Sarah recognized immediately. It was Harrison's emergency beacon, disguised as a decorative artifact that would fit perfectly in an art collector's cabin. Harrison was already aboard the yacht. The realization brought both relief and terror. Relief because it meant wasn't completely alone and unprotected. Terror because it suggested that Harrison had anticipated this trap and had walked into it voluntarily. Sarah said, moving closer to the table, "This figurine is beautiful. Where did you find it?" "It was a gift," replied carefully, "from someone who wanted to make sure I was protected." The exchange confirmed Sarah's suspicions. Harrison had somehow managed to get aboard the yacht and had left the beacon to signal his presence. The question was where he was now and what he was planning to do. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of commotion from elsewhere on the yacht, shouting voices, running footsteps, and what sounded like doors slamming. Sarah and exchanged glances, both recognizing the signs of a security alert. "It seems our evening is becoming more interesting," said dryly. Before Sarah could respond, the cabin door opened again, but this time it wasn't Al who entered. Instead, 3 armed men in tactical gear moved into the room with the efficient precision of professional operators. Their weapons were raised but not directly threatening, and their faces were covered by balaclavas that concealed their identities. "Dr. Blackwood, doctor," said the apparent leader in accented English, "you will come with us now. Do not resist, and you will not be harmed." Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. These could be Al's security personnel, taking them to a more secure location. They could be rival intelligence operatives who had discovered the operation, or they could be part of some larger plot that none of them had anticipated. But as they were escorted through the yacht's corridors, Sarah caught sight of something that made her heart race with hope rather than fear. Through a porthole, she could see the Monaco harbor, and in the distance, she spotted the running lights of several small boats moving toward the yacht in what appeared to be a coordinated approach. Her team was coming. The next few minutes would determine whether this operation ended in success or catastrophe, but at least Sarah knew they wouldn't be facing whatever came next alone. Harrison had somehow managed to get inside Al's defenses and was bringing tactical support from outside. As they reached the yacht's main deck, the situation became clearer. Al was there, but he was no longer the composed, sophisticated host from earlier in the evening. His expensive jacket was torn, his face was bruised, and he was being held at gunpoint by a figure in black tactical gear that Sarah recognized immediately. Harrison had Al. But the victory was short-lived. As Sarah and were pushed onto the deck, she could see that Harrison was surrounded by at least 6 armed men, and more were emerging from the yacht's interior. Whatever rescue plan he had implemented, he was vastly outnumbered and... "Commander," Harrison called out when he saw her, abandoning all pretense of cover identities, "are you and Lieutenant Commander unharmed?" "We're fine, Gunnery Sergeant," Sarah replied, trying to assess the tactical situation while maintaining communication. "What's your status?" "Currently enjoying Mr. Al's hospitality," Harrison replied grimly, "though I think his invitation is about to expire." Al spoke for the first time since they had reached the deck, his voice carrying rage and humiliation. "You are all dead. You understand that, don't you? You have no idea what forces you have set in motion." "Actually," said a new voice from the darkness beyond the yacht's lights, "I think we have a pretty good idea." His voice carried across the water with the calm confidence of someone who held the tactical advantage. Sarah could see the running lights of the approaching boats more clearly now, and she realized that Al's yacht was being surrounded by a coordinated naval operation. "Mr. Al," continued through what was obviously a powerful megaphone, "this is Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy. You are surrounded by American naval forces operating under international maritime law. Release the American personnel immediately and prepare to be boarded. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of boat engines and the gentle lapping of waves against the yacht's hull. Al's men were looking around nervously, clearly unsure how to respond to a situation that had escalated far beyond their training or expectations. "You cannot do this," Al shouted toward the approaching boats. "This is Monaco territorial waters. You have no authority here." "Actually," Sarah said calmly, "we do." She reached into her purse and pulled out a document that she had hoped never to use. "This is a warrant issued by the International Court of Justice for your arrest on charges of terrorism, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. The government of Monaco has agreed to cooperate with this operation." Al stared at the warrant in disbelief. "This is impossible. My diplomatic connections were compromised the moment Lieutenant Commander gathered evidence of your Russian intelligence connections," Sarah interrupted. "Your diplomatic immunity was revoked 6 hours ago." The information hit Al like a physical blow. Sarah could see him realizing that his carefully constructed world of wealth and protection was collapsing around him. But cornered predators were often at their most dangerous. "If I cannot escape," Al said with cold fury, "then none of you will survive to enjoy your victory." He reached into his jacket and pulled out what appeared to be a small electronic device. Sarah recognized it immediately as a dead man's switch, the kind of device used to trigger explosives if the operator was killed or incapacitated. "This yacht is equipped with enough explosives to sink a warship," Al announced. "Release my men and allow us to leave, or we all die together." The standoff was complete. Al had the ability to kill everyone aboard the yacht, but using that ability would also mean his own death. Sarah's team had overwhelming tactical superiority, but they couldn't use it without triggering a catastrophic explosion. It was Harrison who broke the impasse. "You know," he said conversationally to Al, "there's something you should probably know about that dead man's switch." Al turned to look at him, suspicion and confusion evident on his face. "While you were playing host to the ladies," Harrison continued, "I spent some time exploring your yacht, found the explosives, found the wiring, found the whole setup. Really impressive work, professional-grade stuff that would definitely sink this boat and everyone on it." "What is your point?" Al demanded. Harrison smiled, and for the first time since Sarah had known him, it was a completely genuine expression of satisfaction. "My point is that I spent 12 years as a demolitions expert before I got into security work, and I've spent the last 3 hours rewiring your entire system." He held up his own small electronic device. "See, the thing about dead man switches is that they're only effective if they're connected to something that can actually explode. Your switch is now connected to the yacht's fireworks display system. Very impressive show, lots of noise and lights, but not particularly dangerous unless you're standing directly underneath it." Al's face went pale as the implications sank in. "You're lying." "Only one way to find out," Harrison replied cheerfully. "But I should mention that the actual explosives are now wired to my device. So if anything happens to me or to any member of my team, this yacht really will become a submarine. Of course, I've also rigged it so that I can detonate specific sections without killing everyone aboard. Your choice." The bluff was perfect because it wasn't entirely a bluff. Harrison had clearly spent his time aboard the yacht productively, and his demolitions expertise was well documented. Al had no way of knowing how much truth was in Harrison's claims, but he couldn't afford to gamble with his own life. "What do you want?" Al asked finally. "Simple," Sarah said, stepping forward to take control of the negotiation. "You surrender peacefully, your men lay down their weapons, and everyone goes home alive. You'll face trial in an international court, but you'll live to see it." "And if I refuse?" "Then Gunnery Sergeant Harrison demonstrates his demolitions expertise, and we all find out whether your yacht's safety equipment is as impressive as its entertainment systems." The silence stretched for nearly a full minute as Al weighed his options. Sarah could see him calculating odds, considering alternatives, and gradually realizing that he had been outmaneuvered completely. "I surrender," he said finally, letting the dead man's switch fall from his hand. The sound it made hitting the deck was followed immediately by a spectacular fireworks display that lit up the Monaco harbor like a 4th of July celebration. Harrison's modifications had worked perfectly, lots of impressive pyrotechnics. but no danger to anyone aboard the yacht. "Well," said as Al's men began laying down their weapons, "that was educational." Sarah found herself laughing despite the tension of the past few hours. Educational is one way to put it. As and the tactical team boarded the yacht to secure the prisoners and evidence, Sarah took a moment to appreciate what they had accomplished. They had successfully infiltrated a sophisticated terrorist operation, gathered invaluable intelligence, and captured a high-value target without losing any personnel. But more importantly, they had done it as a team. Intelligence gathering had been flawless, Harrison's tactical innovations had been brilliant, and coordination had been professional and effective. "Commander," Harrison said as the prisoners were being processed, "I owe you an apology." Sarah turned to face him with curiosity. "For what?" "For doubting your judgment. When you first took command, I thought you were just another bureaucrat trying to prove something. I was wrong." "You were," Sarah agreed matter-of-factly. "But you figured it out when it mattered. That's what counts." Harrison nodded slowly. "Permission to make a request, ma'am." "Granted. I'd like to transfer permanently to this team, if you'll have me. I've learned more about leadership and teamwork in the past month than I learned in the previous 5 years." Sarah studied his face carefully. The arrogance and resentment that had characterized their first meeting were gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine respect and humility. "What makes you think you'd fit in with this team?" she asked. "Because this team doesn't just follow orders," Harrison replied. "It thinks creatively, adapts to changing situations, and accomplishes missions that conventional wisdom says are impossible. That's the kind of unit I want to be part of." Sarah looked around at her team, coordinating with intelligence analysts, directing the evidence collection, and the SEALs working with quiet efficiency to secure the yacht and its contents. These were exactly the kind of people she wanted to work with, the kind of professionals who could adapt to any challenge and deliver results under the most difficult circumstances. "Request granted, Gunnery Sergeant," she said. "Welcome to SEAL Team 7. As the yacht was towed back to Monaco Harbor and the prisoners were transferred to federal custody, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that first night at Murphy's Steakhouse. A simple dinner observation had led to one of the most successful intelligence operations in recent memory, and a team that had started with personality conflicts and mutual suspicion had become something much more valuable. The mission was complete, but Sarah knew this was just the beginning. There would be other operations, other challenges, and other opportunities to prove that unconventional thinking and innovative tactics could succeed where traditional approaches had failed. But for now, she was content to watch the Monaco sunrise and appreciate the satisfaction that came from a job well done and a team that had proven itself capable of achieving the impossible. The war on terrorism was far from over, but tonight they had struck a significant blow for justice and security. And they had done it together, as professionals who respected each other's abilities and trusted each other's judgment. It was exactly the kind of team Sarah had always wanted to lead.